KoitCast.
Hi Nick, welcome back to KoitCast.
Nice to see you again, Paul.
Well, thank you for coming back.
Yeah, this is the third time that we've had a chat.
Correct, and we got a few more things to go through. They were on my list from last time, and we didn't get to them in time. So now we have the time. So here we go. I'm gonna start with this for you: the spirit hierarchy. There are seemingly rules on the other side, and with them interfering or not interfering with us. Does this suggest that at some time previous they did interfere or interact a lot, and perhaps they messed things up, hence why the need for rules?
I don't know, Paul. I think Occam's razor comes in here. Believe the simplest, shortest version that seems to match the phenomena, rather than add on belief systems and worlds that you need to explain it. So what I would say is believe as little as you can in order to understand these things.
Clear your mind and then just whatever it is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I'll leave that as that because we can't really explore much more than that.
Well,
okay.
As far as hierarchies in the spirit world, I mean, you might be aware that the church in medieval times believed that heaven was ruled by lords and dukes and earls. It was a celestial fiefdom. And the Christian church doesn't talk about that, but they've never actually abandoned that description of heaven because it was relevant for centuries in ancient times. So I tend to say, I don't know what the other world is going to be like in such detail that I can say it's heaven or it's hell or it's purgatory or it's something very different. But I can tell you what spirits say. Spirit have said to me, it's not heaven, but it's very nice.
I like that.
It's
I like that a lot.
It's very positive. It's very clean and free from the physicality that gives us so many problems in our earthly life. And we still have parties. We still have meeting up with loved ones. We still have. We can create experiences. We have our memories and our relationships, and they continue. Now that could be heaven for many people.
Yeah, well, either way, it's positive. It's not something to be fearful of.
Yeah.
So I love that. Excellent. Okay, we're going to move into the territory of Albert Best. Last time, I think on the first episode we got together on, you spoke a little bit about him to me. Can you expand on him, who he is as a person, what his gift or abilities were?
Okay, so I'm not very good with dates, and I don't want to spend any time looking up my notes. But Albert Best was born in Northern Ireland and lived briefly in Northern Ireland, where he was adopted by the Best family. His own parentage may have been kind of questionable. Traveling folk, poor folk, they left them with the Best family because they couldn't look after him. They had no contact with him. Albert didn't know that he was adopted for many years. He once met his birth grandmother, as it were, his mother's mother, but she was dismissed summarily by the Best family, and Albert was told not to mention her again. He fought in the Enniskillen Fusiliers, lost his wife and 3 children during the Belfast Blitz when he was out in North Africa fighting, and he was taken prisoner of war there and executed, they thought, but he managed to escape. When he returned home and found his family had been completely obliterated, he couldn't even recognize the street they had lived in because it had been flattened. He had what he described as something of a nervous breakdown. And he came to Scotland to recuperate, where he got a job as a postman. And quickly he was known as a psychic postman because he could read the contents of envelopes without opening.
a good a good
And
scenario to
yeah,
have. Yeah.
and managers came down from Glasgow just to see him do this. He went on through a number of spiritualist connections which came to him. He didn't have these connections in advance. And he was asked to go to several different meetings and seances where he experienced such wonderful phenomena that it motivated him to become a healer and subsequently to become a medium himself. So in the Glasgow area, I got to know him as a healer and medium through very personal evidence that he gave to me just as a member of the audience. And I pursued a friendship with him, which lasted for 6, maybe 7 years until the day he died. And Sarah was very fond of him and knew him very well too. I used to visit him roughly once a fortnight. Sometimes I would bring a bottle of whiskey. Sometimes he would provide the whiskey, and we had some wonderful chats. And so then he would come to our house in the intervening weeks, and Sarah would cook some plain Irish home cooking, which he really fancied, and he didn't have anyone in his life that could do it as often as she did. And I learned most of what I know about spiritual mediumship from Albert. And I can give you lots of evidences that he was genuine, because I think there are a lot of mediums out there who want the world to think they're better than they actually can show. Albert was not in that
I'd like you to
category.
tell me of a few scenarios. I know last time we spoke, you mentioned a young lad in a wheelchair that Albert had apparently pulled the tumor out of his head, and it was that like jelly or sort of substance he had in his hand, which presumably was the tumor. Can you give me other stories similar, or anything else that sticks out for you about him from your conversations?
Yeah, let me just finish the
Oh, sure.
description
Sorry.
of that young man. What I saw was Albert in a trance, speaking in his eyes shut, speaking in fluent German, who was his medical doctor guide, and he simply stroked the young man's forehead once with his fingers, just lightly, and I saw a dark globular mass come away in his fingers, and he shook his hands in a bowl of water, sat back down, and appeared after several seconds to come back to normal waking consciousness. And you said, what just happened? I wasn't impressed by that, because I thought, well, you would expect that someone who was acting to act as if they didn't know what just happened. Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
But
yeah.
I kept in touch with the young man's mother. And 3 weeks later, or maybe 2.5 weeks later, I phoned her up and I said, any update? Wondering if the young man had improved. He had been told he had a terminal cancer condition that was inoperable behind one of his eyes. And the mother said, yes, I've had an apology. I said, an apology? For what? She said, the oncologist said he must have mixed up my son's x-rays with another patient, because my son doesn't have a cancerous tumor and there's no evidence that he ever did.
Wow. It's a wow moment
Now,
again.
that to me was an evidential moment, because there will be very few oncologists who mix up patients' records like that. And I think it's the greater probability is that I witnessed a miracle.
Well, exactly. There's a before and an after state. It's as simple as that. Yeah. Okay,
Now,
so
if that had been the only healing that Albert had done, then I would think singularity, rogue results, maybe I misunderstood, or my expectation, it was wish fulfillment, who knows? But Albert was known as a healer and had conducted many healings. Can I give you an example of an extraordinary one, as
please.
opposed to a normal one, which is the person gets better? There was a child in the hospital, and Albert was asked to go and heal the child. The child was very young. My memory escapes me. I wasn't present, but let's say the child was a few months old. It was an infant. So Albert turned up Child was on the cot, family gathered round. He picked the child up in his arms and held it. And Albert's guide, who was an Arab at that time, said, "It's too late, Albert, for this one. The call has already gone out. The best you can do is to ease the child's passing." So only Albert heard this voice, and you looked at the family, and their faces are full of expectation for a miracle, and he couldn't do anything. So he put the child back in the cot, and you couldn't take the enormous waves of emotion and the disappointment that would come. So he simply walked out of the room. And he walked along the corridor into hospital gardens or outdoors from the ward, where he was still able in those days to smoke a cigarette. And as he's standing smoking the cigarette, he hears a cry going up from that area of the ward, and someone shouting, "Where's Mr. Best? Get Mr. Best. Where is he?" And he ran back in along the corridor, back into the same room, same child in the same cot with the same family round about. And he scooped the child up in his arms as he did the first time, and the child took one breath and passed. And when he put the child back in the cot, and everyone knew the child had gone, Albert said, "How did you know when to call me?" And the family said, "We didn't." The child's face turned to that of a wizened, brown-faced man, and the child spoke in a gruff man's voice to say, "Tell Mr. Best to come, and quickly." So we shouted for you.
How weird.
Now, to me, you can maybe expect an adult to mimic someone else's voice, but not an infant who's dying. You can maybe expect distraught relatives to recognize when the child is passing or recovering and so on. But I've never heard of people saying the child's face turned to that of an old man. And they described an arabesque feature, the wizened brown tanned skin. And I've never heard, even having heard death rattles and so on, I've never heard an infant child articulate in an adult male voice, "Tell Mr. Best to come in quickly." I just think that's beyond belief, unless it's true.
Of course, yeah. Why would grieving parents make that up? It just doesn't hold any weight to that argument.
Now, there's a footnote to this.
Mm-hmm.
Years later, when Albert was poorly, in the same hospital actually, I visited him. I didn't know he was going to die. I just knew he was in very poor health. There was a young man beside his bed, and not in spirit, in the ordinary sense of speaking. And Albert looked at me and looked at the young man, was probably in his 20s, and said to me, "Nick, you should speak to him when you both leave here." And I said, "Well, I'm pleased to speak to any friend of yours, Albert, because that makes him a friend of mine." I said, "But is there a particular reason why you want us to speak?" And he said, "Yes, I know how skeptical you are, and he will be able to confirm one of the stories that I've told you." So I left when the bell went, shortly thereafter, actually, and I left with the young man, and we got outside and we're about to go our separate ways. I said, "What was Albert talking about?" And he said, "Did he tell you about a child that he was unable to save?" And he mentioned just a few details of the child's face changing and speaking and so on. And I said, "Yes." And I said, "And what you've just said is like a short version of what Albert told me." He said, "Well, that story is true." He said, "And I know because it was my brother who died in front of me."
Whoa. Yeah.
So that young man was visiting Albert when he needed a bit of help, because he had seen Albert trying to help many years previously.
Wow. That's amazing.
So that's what I would call an unusual story of Albert. Most of the stories are Albert turns up, performs a miracle, and goes away. And people are gobsmacked. And it appears in the only book that I know that's been written about Albert Best by his late friend Rosalind Catanach, who ran Wimbledon Spiritualist Church, I think. And she she persuaded Albert, who was very reluctant to have anything written about him. She persuaded him to allow her to write a brief biography, a slim paperback. As Albert grew frail, he lost the capacity to use computers and write handwriting and so on. So I did some of his correspondence for him. And I turned down on his instruction at least 2 TV documentary programs for major UK channels. And Albert's explanation was, I don't want the publicity. And I said, but you've had famous people visiting you, Albert. You know, stars of stage and screen, film stars, pop stars, heads of government, royalty. And he nodded and he said, yeah. But it's the distress that brought them to me that I want to help them with. I don't want to profit from someone else's distress.
Or bring distress on himself with all the attention, yeah.
Yeah. On one occasion, in a spiritualist church meeting, there were 4 or 5 people sitting in a row. They weren't known to me. I don't think they were known to Albert either. And they were strangers. And Albert pointed out to them and said, you're here because a young man who was your brother drowned in a loch in Scotland, a lake, for those of you who aren't Scottish. And they looked at each other in bewilderment and said, yeah. He said, well, I'm here to tell you that he didn't drown. He was murdered by the person he went walking with. And if you wait to the end of this meeting, I'll give you that person's full name and you can take it to the police. Okay. Now, I never followed that case up to see what happened when they went to the police. I have worked with the police a little bit in connection with Albert, and I know that what happens in police investigations sometimes has very little relation to what happens in spiritualist communications. The police can't arrest or deal with anyone on the basis of what a medium says.
No, they have to find fact evidence, don't they, here? That's the thing.
Yeah. But to come back to the point, Albert was able to give surprising and stunning details. And he turned to me once privately and said, I hope this doesn't get out. I said, what do you mean, Albert? You've just given quite stunning evidence. He said, yeah. And if Glasgow criminal underworld realised that I can name them for murder, he said, how long do you think I'll last? So he stopped doing those kinds of demonstrations, or at least giving that kind of evidence. He was asked to get involved with a couple of murders and he turned it down. He turned it down on the grounds that he had retired, which wasn't strictly accurate. He was just very selective. He would still work in cases that involved children, but he was reluctant to work for murders and so on. And he would tell me that, and then I would have to speak to the police and say, look, this isn't happening, here's the reason. And in 2 occasions, I got involved in the murder cases. And I'm nothing in Albert's league in terms of mediumship communication. But both cases seem to provide significant information. I don't really want to talk about myself. I'd much rather talk about Albert. What Albert said to me was that, he said, do you remember the Moors murders, where children were killed and sometimes their bodies were reported to be buried in the Yorkshire moors.
Myra Hindley and all that.
Yeah. He said, well, the police flew me by helicopter to the Yorkshire moors, and with one other medium, we walked about pointing where the children were buried. But there was one child we were looking for where there had been no information at all. And we asked Spirit, where is this child? And Spirit came back and said, the child is not to be found.
Oh, whoa.
And Albert interpreted that as the body had been destroyed so much it wasn't in one place.
Yeah.
Like maybe acid or burning
here.
up.
Yeah, it could be those things, and it probably is those things. But my mind went initially when you said that sentence to maybe there is an actual body to be found, but it wasn't found because the parents or whomever needed to go through that experience for whatever reason. Because there seems to be reasonings.
Yeah. I have had the misfortune of having two children that didn't survive birth. And Albert told me that in his very first meeting with me. And he said, they're here. And his arms went up. He said that a lady had brought them to him, and he was taking each one by hand, and his hands were going up. And I tried not to react, because it was obviously a very emotional thing. So emotional that I really don't want to get into details, because the people that would be upset are still alive. But they said, this is great, because this is the first time we've ever been able to talk to our daddy.
Yeah.
But who's the woman sitting beside him? Because that's not our mummy. And that was correct. That was another lady that had accompanied me to the meeting. How did an uneducated Irishman pick out a stranger and be able to tell the nature of the relationship with two deceased children and the woman sitting to his right? I mean, it's incredible. And when I pursued him in that to learn more, he said to me, well, Nick, you can be my friend and you may never get a message. Or you can be a customer, a client, and I'll give you a message and close the door behind you. You choose. And I said, with all the arrogance of a young man, I'd rather be your friend, Albert, because I can get my own messages. You know, maybe I should have, you know.
I have a question, Nick, for you about that case where the infant died.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it's too late, the call went out. Was that a phrase that you used yourself, or was that the actual phrase that was used by the spirit there?
That's what Albert told me.
So what does that mean, the call went out? What have you found out about that?
It suggests the pervasive belief that everyone has a time to die, and you don't die before your time, and it's not normally after your time, it's when you're meant to die, based on the extent to which you've fulfilled your life purposes. Now, of course, the awkward thing about that argument is that some children die when they're very young, so they can't possibly be expected to have achieved any life purposes. But spiritualists have an answer to that too, because they say some spirit people choose to come back to Earth just to experience physicality. That's it, not the learning and maturation that comes for the rest of us. I personally, I'm not so happy with that determinist view of what it means to be a human being. But that was the expression that Albert used because that's what he was told.
No, that's fair enough. I always like to look for meaning behind things because I think there is meaning in everything. I just want to know what it is.
Albert did not encourage me to ask too many questions or ask for favors. But I broke that expectation only once for a friend who's still alive. But I'll tell you the bare bones of the story.
Okay.
A friend's wife phoned me and said, Nick, can you help my hubby? He's suicidal. and he won't listen to anyone, but he might listen to you because he believes in an afterlife, and I want you to tell him what to expect. So I agreed to, and she drove across Scotland, and he visited me, and I confirmed with him that he intended to commit suicide within a week or two. And I said, how long have we known each other? I can't remember what his answer was, but it would have been maybe 20 years or something. I said, okay, will you give me 20 minutes? And of course he said, for what? I said, no. Will you give me 20 minutes for what I want for you? Whether or not you agree or whether or not you understand it, I want 20 minutes. Surely 20 years of a friendship deserves that. So we reluctantly agreed. And I phoned Albert. And I said, I have a friend here. I gave him his first name. And I said, and he's feeling very low, about as low as you can get. Can you help him? Because I've been asked to explain what he should expect in the next world. I said, and I can't think of anybody who could do it better than you, Albert. And Albert knew that I was transgressing the boundaries of our relationship by asking him for a favour to use his mediumship skills. But he agreed to see the young man, and his manner in opening the door let me know he wasn't too happy with me, but he was still willing to help. So I get sent to the bedroom, and my friend was taken into what we call the living room or the lounge. And Albert closed the door, and there was a brief conversation, maybe 15 minutes, and then Albert said, "Right, you can go," and put us both outside, closed the door. And my friend turned to me and said, "What did you tell that old guy about me?" I said, "Nothing." "Oh, your first name and the fact that you were very low." And he said, "As soon as I walked in, he told me my mother's first name and said she was praying that I wouldn't do anything to harm myself, and she was praying to her favourite saints. She's still praying to her favourite saints on the other side." And he named the saint. Yeah, because obviously Catholics have lots of saints they pray to. And Albert said several other things to him that I'm not privy to. But basically, the gist of it is, if you want to be with your mother, you'll not achieve that through suicide, because it's not your time. Your mother doesn't want you to try and do that so you can be with her. But one other crucial piece of information from the mother is forgive yourself for what happened to your brother. This was something I knew nothing about. And I don't want to go into details, except to say that my friend had a childhood guilt from having let his brother cross the road and see him killed in front of him. How can a stranger introduce you to your mother in spirit and give information like that even I didn't know after 2 decades of being his friend? What is that about? It has to be a spontaneous gift for the most part, where the conditions are right. But in this occasion, I was superimposing an expectation that he could do it because I asked. And it worked.
Not because you asked, though, but because it was needed, presumably.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've learned, and I've learned it from other mediums as well, is that spirit tend to respond to need rather than want. So in a typical spiritualist meeting, there are many people who want a message, but there are some who need a message. And those are more likely to get a message because the need is there.
Yeah, I get it.
I can say something and keep the identities of the people out of it. But Albert's mediumship was international. He did world tours before they became popular. On one occasion, he met an Indian family and he warned the young man that he would be killed. And the young man ignored his advice, scoffed at it as if it's just woo-woo, I don't believe in that. And he was subsequently assassinated by the person that Albert, not the individual, but by the type of person that Albert warned him to be careful of. Now, that in itself is just another shrug your shoulders, okay, so he was able to predict the future, big deal, move on. Except the mother heard that Albert had predicted this and went to Albert for advice. So what happens now with my son? Where is he? And, is he? And Albert went into trance and brought through her son, speaking in their local Indian dialect. Now, I can't remember years later whether it was Hindi or Urdu, but it was a local dialect, and it impressed the mother because she knew Albert would never know that dialect. So she began to cultivate an ongoing acquaintance with Albert. She showed him things in her world that were memorable, to do with her belief in her religion. And when Albert went to Amritsar Palace with her, rose petals materialized over their heads, and the ones that fell onto the eternal flame in the palace were not consumed. And Albert had told me this story, and I didn't believe it. It was just one step too far at an early stage in our relationship. And the woman confirmed to me verbally, and my wife Sarah, that she'd asked Albert not to tell this story, but it was correct. And you think to yourself, what the?
Completely, isn't it? Because people of mine and your ilk, it's not that we don't believe it, but it takes us a lot to push us over the line to say, whoa, that did happen. That is that, it's hard.
So she still flies from India to Scotland to have a chat with him.
When
I say still, I mean, while he was alive.
Well, it was like when that Indian entity came through, i.e. the lady's son, did he express any regret as to what he did? Oh, I should have listened. Or was it just, it is what it is?
He wishes things had been different. He would like to have been around for longer, but not specific guilt in relation to Albert.
In relation to that choice he made, I mean, yeah.
More a general regret that things worked out in a way that he didn't believe they would.
Which backs up exactly what you said on the last episode, which is we take us with us. We have the same thoughts and feelings we do here, but there. Yeah.
Would you be interested, Paul, in hearing a story about Albert, which is to do with Albert rather than to do with other people that he's helped?
Of course, go for it.
He was driving or being driven, chauffeur driven through Africa, having just done a tour that encompassed Australia. And he was with another medium. I don't know who the other medium was. I could probably find out though. And the other medium got a message from Spirit about Albert. Take Mr. Best to such and such a village on your route home, back to London, which is where Albert stayed at that point in time. So the medium turned to Albert and said, I've just had a message from Spirit. We have to take a slight deviation off our route, go to such and such a village, and I don't know why, but Spirit want you there. And Albert said, no. I'm tired, I'm fed up, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I want to go home, it's too hot here, or whatever his excuse was. He just said no. So the other medium said to the driver, discreetly and privately, go to this village and don't say where we're going. So the vehicle turned up outside a circle of mud huts, with a typical thatched roof with a hole in the middle for the fire smoke and the village seemed to be empty. Not disused, but just empty. And Albert realized he'd been tricked. And the medium said, look, you're here now. Just do what Spirit say. Go into the buildings. they want you to meet someone, but I don't know who or why or what. And Albert told me he must have been in a foul mood, and he let the other guy know. And he got out, shut the door.
Swear words, swear words involved.
Well, he was an Irishman, probably. And he walked into this circle of mud huts, and there was nobody there. It was a village in use, but at that particular time of the day, he couldn't see anyone. So he began to walk round the circle of mud huts with the intention of completing the circle and getting back to the vehicle. And 3 or 4 huts in, an African man, a black man, came out and said, "Are you Mr. Best from London?" And Albert thought, right, so he's been told I'm coming. This is a hoax. This is a trick. This is to embarrass me or something. So he went, yes. Wasn't too happy. And the black man said, then you should come in because there are people here to see you. So Albert came in. It was a slightly darkened room. The only light coming in was through the hole in the conical top of the roof and the doorway. And the black man asked Albert to sit on the other side of the central fire and sat down himself with a little bag beside him and said, I am what you would call a witch doctor. He said, but we don't use that term. I am the healer or the medicine man for the village. And Albert didn't really think too much of that. The man reached into a pouch and brought out some dust. At least that's what it looked like, which he threw in the fire. And there was a small explosion of smoke. And when the smoke cleared, Albert's wife and 3 children were standing opposite the other side of the fire. And he saw them and he couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't speak. And the children ran round the fire and grabbed a hold of him and hugged him. And he burst into tears. And then his wife walked round the fire and they hugged and kissed. And the wife said things to him which he didn't tell me in detail, but basically they were in a world where everything was good. They were happy, but they were waiting for him to join them. And Albert said, I don't know how many minutes passed. It might have been 20 and it seemed like 2. He said, I just know it was too short. And after the kisses and the cuddles and the hugs and the crying and the snatches of conversation, the black medicine man said, you'll need to let them go, Albert. The power is going or fading. And very reluctantly, he let go of his children. His wife took them to the other side of the fire. And Albert said, and they became like snow. They simply dematerialized.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Now, Albert told me that story and asked me never to repeat it during his lifetime. It was too personal. And he told me it in response to a question that I asked him, which was, Albert, you spent your life doing things with spirit. What has spirit ever done for you?
And there's
just
the answer.
you.
Yeah.
Just you. And that was the story he told me. He said, after that day, I knew my wife and children were waiting for me, that they continued to exist, that they were happy in a good place. He said, death meant nothing to me after that. I was simply waiting to join them. And indeed, on his deathbed, he turned to Sarah and a mutual friend and said, you need to let me go. My wife and kids have come to collect.
It's nice to know that bit. It's sad, but also nice at the same time.
Yeah.
Mm. And when his family were around the other side of the fire with him, hugging him, as in physicality, they were physical at that stage.
Yes. Initially, when you saw them, all he could do was see them. He didn't know what was going to happen. But when the children ran and hit him with their cuddles, and then the wife came round and they had conversation, he knew they were as real as they could be. There was touch, there was love, there was intimacy, and laughter and tears, and yeah.
It's incredible.
So, if any of your readers are interested in the late Glasgow healer and medium Albert Best, I would recommend that they get his biography, which I think is out of print now, but it's written by Rosalind Catanach, and it's called The Best of Both Worlds. And yes, he was the adopted uncle of the famous footballer George Best.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
A nice
And
tie-in. Oh,
George used to nip up to Glasgow to stay with Albert when the media pressure was too much for him and he wanted a boat hole to escape to. But there wasn't a lot of contact apart from those occasions between George and Albert. Um, Albert was adopted and lived in Northern Ireland, whereas George Best was in England. And when Albert came to Scotland, there was still a physical distance. But he was regarded affectionately by George Best as the uncle he didn't want the world to know about because it would take away his escape route.
yeah, no, fair play on that one. Now, Nick, I know I'm conscious of time, but I know there's a link here to you in that Albert had a mission then, or that other chap had a mission to get Albert to go to a place. Now, a mission was given to you to go to Sao Paulo. Are you able to quickly hit us on that story?
Um, yeah, I retired from a teaching job 11 years ago, approximately 12 years ago. At 3:30 or so in the morning, I woke up with a male voice in spirit. I think I know who it was. It was someone I came to regard as a guide, but it might have been someone else. And he said, "We want you to go to Sao Paulo." And I didn't know whether Sao Paulo was a town, city, region, country, or whatever. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because there are things we want to teach you, and it's easier there than it is in Scotland." I said, "Okay." I said, "But I can't go there if I'm in teaching. I have to leave my job." And he went, "Okay."
Blase, just like that, yeah.
Yeah. So I walked in after 34 years of teaching and asked if I could get early retirement. And basically, I was told no. I wanted the package that other colleagues were getting, and apparently it was offered to people that they wanted rid of. It was like
Yeah.
a golden handshake. So I put it out of my mind. I was told to wait a year, and I did wait a year, but it was Spirit that came back to me. Same month, I think the same date, but certainly at 3:30 in the morning. And the person, it was the same person, and they said, "Oh, you were going to Sao Paulo." And I said, "Well, I did try to leave my job." And I said, "Then they wouldn't let me." To which he said, "So are you going or not?" And I said, "Is it that important?" And he said, "Well, we want to teach you stuff." Yeah. So I went in, typed up at 4:30 in the morning a letter of resignation, went in. They still wouldn't give me an enhanced retirement package. They offered me a 5% deduction in my retirement funds if I left at that point. So I did. I handed them a letter of resignation, gave them the requisite notice, and bought a flight to South America. I had a physics professor friend, I still have, and he thought that my story suggested a spiritual adventure, and he was wanting to write a travel book. So we thought, there's a good idea, combine travel book with spiritual adventure. So he wanted to come with me. And I said to Spirit, "Can I go to Machu Picchu?" And the person said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I've always wanted to go there because I've heard so much about it. And I'm going to be in South America." And the voice, and this is how the voice spoke to me. "All right then. But you have to go to Sao Paulo." You
Yeah, if
have to
you
go to Sao
must, yeah.
Paulo. Yeah. And when I told my friend Barry, he said, "I want to go to Rio de Janeiro. I've never been." So I had to ask Spirit again, "Can I go to Rio de Janeiro?" To which the voice said, "We've already agreed you can go to Machu Picchu. Now you want to go to Rio. Are you going to go to Sao Paulo? I said, I promise. He went, it's up to you, what he said. We went to Machu Picchu. I met the chief guardian of Machu Picchu, or the deputy guardian of Machu Picchu, a guy called Cucho. And without going into a lot of detail just now, we did a private ayahuasca ceremony. Graham Hancock had written in a book that he thought it was a profound spiritual experience. I thought it was a drug-induced eruption in my subconscious rather than a spiritual, but it was very moving, maybe for another day. And we did go to Rio, and like all good stories, you know, we promised we would never speak about what happened in Rio once we left Rio. So I'll keep my side of that.
Yeah, was it that one?
But we arrived in Sao Paulo. It was midnight or 11 o'clock, and it was dark. And we were in a sort of 3-star hotel. So we just wanted to go to bed after the flight and so on and get up in the morning. When we got up in the morning, my friend, who's an Uber organizer, had maps and timetables and routes and other research evidence, information for travel. And he said, right, so what are we doing after breakfast? I said, I don't know. He said, no. He said, what I mean is, who are we going to visit? Where are we going to visit? What are we going to visit? And I said, I don't know. He said, Nick, I've come halfway around the world for you for a spiritual adventure. He said, you don't have a bloody clue. Have you even Googled it? And I said, no. He said, so physically, what are we going to do? I said, we'll go a walk. Where? I don't know. I said, we'll go a walk. He said, for how long? I said, till I get tired. So we went a meandering walk for 40 minutes with my friend saying to me, you're in a city 3 times the size of London. Where the hell do you think you're going to walk to? But we walked, and the first building I stopped outside of was a rather ordinary looking 12-story office block. But it had one word on the wall, esprit. And I figured with my poor Portuguese that esprit probably meant spirit, but it would be the kind of thing you would have in a product, you know, sportswear, or maybe a flight, a holiday company or something. And I walked in and I knew I was in the right place because there was a bronze bust of Allan Kardec on the right-hand side. Allan Kardec being the founder of Brazilian Spiritism.
Wow.
And the woman said to me, can I help you? And I said, I'm Nick. I'm from Scotland. Spirit have sent me here, but I don't know why. And she snapped her fingers, and a man in the corner came walking over, and I thought to myself, oh no, she's calling security.
Yeah. Get out.
There's some Scottish nut job has arrived in her business, you know, and she needs to get security. And she told the man in Portuguese what I'd said. And he turned to me and said in English, welcome, Nick. Spirit told us a fortnight ago you'd set out on your journey to be here. We've been expecting you. If Spirit have told you to come all the way from Scotland, he said, then you are very welcome to the largest spiritual healing hospital on the planet. Certainly the largest that we know of in Brazil, and we don't know of anywhere in the world like this. There are 11 stories dedicated to helping patients, and 1 story is a car park. We treat 5,000 patients with 500 trained healers, and we've trained them all for 5 years. You can go anywhere with the people's permission. You can listen in on any consultation, treatment, healing, whatever. And he said, for as long as you're here. How long's that going to be? And I said, about a week and a half. And he said, that's fine. I said, but I don't know your language. So he got me a translator, an interpreter. And she stayed with me for the whole time. And she was a wonderful woman. I hope to meet her again someday. But basically, I was allowed to observe everything, from consultations to therapies. And I learned to have a system of healing which was not known to me, but it involved a patient sitting in a chair with a healer on the patient's right, left, and behind. And the three healers would be doing this with their hands, but not touching the patient. And they would be speaking in a whisper. Now, I don't know, as the observer in the room, whether they were speaking to spirit, each other, or the patient. Maybe all of these things. But a gentleman was sitting beside me. I didn't realize he was a minder. Right? Mm-hmm. He said to me, "What do you see, Nick?" And I said, "I see three people trying to heal someone that I presume is a patient who wants the healing." "Anything else?" he said. I said, "Well, yeah. The woman who's the healer on the left-hand side of the patient isn't well herself. And it's affecting the energy that's flowing through her. She really shouldn't be doing this. She should be getting somebody else." And he called the woman over and sent her away and said she was a clerical admin worker until about 5 minutes ago. She's never done this sort of thing before. You have to take her place. So I then stood and I felt a surge of power going through me into this patient. So I did the hands thing and the meditative trance altered state, and I wasn't able to speak to the other healers, but I think I was able to contribute energy. When one of the days when I left the hospital, I went to a restaurant in the area, and I was sitting having a meal with my friend, and suddenly Spirit said to me, "Go and talk to the woman who's just sat down outside." So I put down my knife and fork and got up from the table, and my friend said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Spirit have just told me to speak to the woman who's just sat down outside." And he leant back and he had a line of sight that I didn't. And he went, "Okay, there's an Oriental lady who's sitting outside. Maybe it's her." And he teased me with the fact that she was a very good-looking young woman, as if that was my motivation. So I got up, went outside, and motioned to the other side of the bench and said, "Is it all right if I sit here?" And she said in a very cultivated English accent, "Certainly, please do." And I said, "You speak English?" I said, "And very well, may I say." I said, "I'm entitled to judge. I'm a teacher of English." And she smiled. And I said, "Where did you learn to speak English like that?" "In Brazil." She said, "I learned it in Cambridge. I'm an actress. And I was told if I wanted to progress my acting career, I had to develop an English accent. So I went to Cambridge for 6, 9 months, whatever it was." She said, "Here I sing to pay my bills, and I'm hoping to maybe get an opportunity to act, ideally in America." And she said, "That's enough of me. What about you?" She said, "Why are you here in an area that tourists don't come to?" And I said, "Oh, it's a long story." She said, "Tell me." I said, "I think Spirit wanted me to come here, maybe to learn about healing." And she burst out laughing. She said, "Well, I'm the person that can tell you because I'm a medium and a healer." And she proceeded to talk with me on the subject of mediumship and healing, and she knew her subject. She knew of people in England that I knew of. She didn't see anything that I thought indicated a mistake or a lack of knowledge. And I thought to myself afterwards, because we parted after 20 minutes or so, I thought to myself, what are the chances? What are the chances of going to a foreign country, going to a non-tourist area, sitting down beside an Oriental woman and finding out that she knows as much, if not more, of mediumship and healing than I do? I mean, it has to be hundreds of thousands against it happening by chance, I would think. So that's just one example of why I felt I was in the right place at the right time. I also gave a psychometry reading to a passenger on a train who arranged to meet me later to get more of a reading. And I had a wonderful time, so much that I didn't want to come back. I wanted to continue to explore John of God, who was unfortunately a disgraced healer, but not at that time. He was highly regarded. And I said, I'll just stay on. I didn't have much time or money, but I wanted to stay on and go to the Amazon. And my friend said to me, I'm not going back to Glasgow Airport to be met by Sarah. And when she says, where is he? I say, somewhere in the Amazonian rainforest. He said, you're coming with me, even if I have to grab you by the scruff of your neck. And we laughed, and I came home.
Nick, it tells me a couple of things. One, you're incredibly trusting, because let's be fair, a voice told you to go somewhere and you went.
Twice.
Yeah. So that's amazing that you were able to do that, first off. And secondly, obviously you were meant to be there because you had X amount of introductions to speak with certain people. If you had to look back on that, was it a needed step for you? Did you have to go there?
Have to? No. I could have stayed in Scotland. Was it helpful to go there? Definitely.
Yeah, that's my point. Was it you needed that bit of helpfulness to be like a rung on the ladder for you to get to the next phase of whatever learning or experience or gifts or whatever you have?
What it made me realise is I don't have to know the end point to start the journey.
Sorry, what does that mean?
It means that if Spirit tell me to do something, I don't need to know how that's going to pan out to the end point, the outcome, before I say, all right, I'll do it then.
Yeah.
That if Spirit say do something and I do it, it works. It's significant. It's meaningful. And I can't think of a single occasion where it's led to disappointment, confusion, or an adverse outcome. So I'm trying to think where Spirit have told me to do. Yeah, Spirit have quite often tell me to go help a total stranger. So I'm sitting in a restaurant and they said, the woman in the far right corner, go and talk to her because you can help her. And I say, no. And they say, why not? She needs help. You can help her. She needs healing. You can help her. No, I'm sitting with friends. I don't know her. This is a public place. Maybe she won't welcome the contact, especially if it leads to personal talk. No. And they said, this is important to her, even if it's not important to you. Just talk to her. That's it. So I went over, I waited till she was leaving, caught her at the door and said, I'm not quite sure how to tell you this, but I can see that you're in a lot of pain and that part of your distress isn't just the pain. It's the fact that you can't talk to anyone about it, even your partner who's treating you so badly, it's making you feel more upset. And she burst into tears and said, do you know me? Because almost nobody in my life knows what you've just said. And I said, I know enough to be able to help you. And I did help her. I don't really want to say what happened after that, except I was able to help her significantly. And later on, she died, but it was not of a health condition.
I see.
So that's an example where Spirit tell me to do something and I do it, and it always works at some level in a way which I might not have been able to foresee. If I had said, you need to tell me why I'm going to talk to her, what's going to happen after I talk to her, how long this is going to be, how much time is going to involve, and is she definitely going to get help? And my belief will kick in and I'll say, all right then. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, this is where that trust comes in, and you've learned to accept it and go with it, which is fair enough. Nick, that's amazing stories you've given. I'm going to quickly enter the Koit zone with you now. Koit zone. So we've gone from the profound to the inane now. So let's start with a very easy question. Favorite film of yours, please?
Funnily enough, I was asked that today, and I struggled to answer it.
Oh.
I definitely like De Niro and Pacino. So an iconic cinema scene would be from the film Heat.
Heat, yeah.
Yeah. And can I just share a very brief anecdote where I used to have a brief friendship with a British actor called John Sessions.
Oh, yes.
He was a comic actor, and he was a very good impersonator. And I invited him out to dinner, and we were sitting at dinner, and this topic came up, favorite movies. And I said that I really loved that iconic scene in the cafe diner. And John Sessions immediately recalled the scene word for word and was able to imitate De Niro's accent and Pacino's accent so well that I closed my eyes and thought, using my best judgment, I'm 90-odd% sure that I'm in the movie. because with my eyes shut, De Niro was there and Pacino was there, and they were giving the exact script.
Quality.
So, of course, I opened my eyes, realised that I hadn't gone to a different place and time, and I admired John Sessions for his ability. Unfortunately, he's gone too in recent years.
Yeah. I used to watch him on Whose Line Is It Anyway? If you've ever seen that program,
right.
He was good on that.
Yeah. And he believed in spirit and in spirit messages, but he didn't like to talk about it. And I think he felt it might make him look foolish rather than amusing. Yeah. That's one movie. A favourite of mine is also Cinema Paradiso, which is a French-Italian production about a little boy growing up and the influence of cinema and his friendship with the projectionist and his teenage angst trying to cultivate or court a teenage girl who was about to leave, and what happened to him in his adult life as a direct consequence. Now, I've grown up with a love of the movies, and I'm fortunate that as an adult I was able to take part in a few films. Not on screen, except for one, but that was because I didn't want to lose my teaching reputation by hanging about with people that were doing things they shouldn't have been doing on set. I can't mention names, but at that time he was heavily into drugs, and I was his security. Yeah.
Actors.
Yeah,
Nick,
but at least I'm not name dropping.
No, that's true. That is true. Are you good at DIY?
No.
Okay. So Sarah does it in your house, does she?
I buy somebody in to do it.
Ah, there you go. What is your favourite possession? And I mean item.
My favourite possession? Probably photographs. Artwork. You'll have heard of the actor Anthony Quinn. His son is a gifted sculptor called Lorenzo Quinn. And I have several pieces of Lorenzo's artwork in my house, mainly on a romantic theme of hands touching or reaching for each other. And I discovered when I visited the Vatican that he did work for them too. So I have several pieces, and those would be my most favourite objects, other than photographs. And I like photographs because of the memories they evoke.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one with photographs. Sometimes I look back at my old photographs of holidays and yeah, that was good. Yeah, so that sort of thing. What were you like as a kid?
I'm the son of a clergyman, so I was a good kid.
That's what you have to tell me, but
That's right. Yeah, I was a good boy. And the things that I got up to that my parents never found out about will remain with me uh, until I die, I think. Um, I was quiet. I was introverted. I was the victim of bullying, and I was led to believe that I didn't amount to much in the world because I was kept behind a year at school because I hadn't been able to keep up, mainly because my father moved jobs 5 times, moved home address 5 times in schools. Um, but here's what I would like to say to your audience on a non-paranormal theme. Um, don't allow anyone to influence you that you are not enough. Because I believed that I was slow, thick, and stupid. But actually, I was the third top student when I graduated out of 2000. I just had to wait for the opportunity to show what I could do. And when I got the opportunity, I seized it with both hands. And most of the people that made fun of me for being kept back a year at school are in desultory occupations and leading ordinary lives. And I can say I've had a successful career, and the fun isn't over yet.
Wonderful. I like to hear that, sentiments of winning. So what my girlfriend would class a high five story. Yeah, she likes
Yeah.
those ones. Do you have any recurring dreams?
Um, Not over a long period of time. What tends to happen is I'll have a dream perhaps 2 nights in a row, very occasionally 3 or 4 nights in a row, and I get the next bit of the dream the next night, and then it
Oh,
comes to
wow.
a conclusion. But not normally for any longer than 2 or 3 nights. And usually they are dreams that are stress related. In other words, I've forgotten to do something and I'm running around trying to hold it all together, which was sometimes what I did in my teaching career. So I think it's just a memory and it surfaces from time to time. I still work part time. So before I came onto your show, I was doing something for my job um, because I had to. I couldn't afford to leave it until tomorrow.
Fair play. It's nice that you get your dreams in chapters. I get mine in just blobs, I think. I don't know. Do you have a favourite chocolate or sweets?
Any kind of chocolate is good for me, providing it's fairly intense. I'm not so happy with the fatty stuff that doesn't actually technically deserve the term chocolate. I've just read yesterday that some famous biscuits in Britain can no
Penguin.
longer be called
Yeah.
chocolate. Yeah.
Penguin and
Um,
Club Ice, right, yeah.
yeah, but I did get some nice chocolate from my wife when she was in Denmark just a fortnight ago. And some of the nicest chocolates I've tasted. I live near a place where there are two chocolatiers, and they can sometimes do nice liqueur chocolates that go well with whiskey. And I'm exploring that whole taste thing, whiskey and chocolate, much to the approval of my whiskey drinking friends, because they get chocolates that are like £1 each, and they get
A
plenty
little
of them,
shot, yeah.
and whiskey. Yeah. So dark chocolate or even just high intensity cocoa chocolate would be high end chocolate. Yeah.
I knew you were going to say dark chocolate anyway, because this is a recurring theme amongst what the paranormal and people with mediumistic gifts is they like dark chocolate. That's a thing.
I thought you were going to say that they like the dark arts.
Oh, they like that as well. They love Hogwarts and all that malarkey. But dark chocolate, honestly, is a theme running through it. Have you ever crashed a car?
Yes.
That's a good answer, and we'll move swiftly on. Can you tell me a quick, funny story of something that happened to you as a teacher?
Oh, as a teacher, a funny one.
Yeah.
Yeah. After being promoted and moving away from a school, I met a former pupil that I quite liked in a car park. And about 5 years had passed, maybe 4 years, something like that. And the reason I liked this young man was because he was a young carer. His home situation was such that he did more than a young person would be expected to do. But when he came into school, he was often tired, irritable, didn't want to be there, wanted to be back home, or wasn't interested. So I was able to help him and talk nicely to him, and he did things for me that showed he was cooperative, or could be cooperative. So when I met him in the car park, I said to him, "Do you know what I remember about you?" And he looked slightly apprehensive. I said, "You still haven't handed in that homework that I gave you just before I left." And of course he laughed. He realized it was a joke. And then I said to him something which wasn't meant to be funny. I said to him, "Can you tell me something?" I said, "I've never really understood it. You would fall out with lots of teachers, but if I arrived, you would always do what I ask you. Why is that? What's special about me?" And he said, "Do you not know the answer to your own question?" I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, it's easy. I liked myself when I was with you."
That's nice.
Now, that's a profound message. And every aspiring teacher should try and achieve that.
Hell yeah.
Especially with the most challenging pupils. When a pupil is abusive, I don't have the attitude that the average person in the street would, which is to be abusive back. My attitude is, this young person's a bad communicator. I wonder what they're really trying to say.
Well done you for looking beyond, and that's the key there, isn't it? Well done. Fair play. Next question is not going to be as give an answer like that one, but what is the funniest TV show to you?
I used to like Taxi, the
yes.
episodic serial with Danny DeVito and who was the other actor?
Christopher Lloyd was in it.
Christopher Lloyd, yeah. I used to laugh uproariously at that. I'm not sure about a television program that I find funny often. To be honest, I don't like comedies because I prefer stuff that's serious, dramatic maybe. But I can tell you the funniest man that I've ever known, seen, or heard. Sir Billy Connolly.
I knew you were going to say, yeah.
Sir Billy Connolly. I had the privilege of meeting him 2 or 3 times in my life. He might not be aware of that now that he's older. But what he said then and what he said since, I find so funny. Sometimes I've rolled off the furniture and held my ribs because I'm laughing so much. He's opened up worlds for me just with his observations of the frailty of people and how they create their own silliness. I would highly recommend, if any of your audience don't know about Sir Billy Connolly, go and look him up. My wife and I have a standing joke about using one of his scripts, which is about the wildebeest in Africa and lions that approach them. And even now, I find it difficult not to smile just thinking about the way that he imitates them and speaks in a Scottish accent as if wildebeest speaks Scottish.
They actually do in real life.
So definitely him. Much funnier than anybody I can think of. And there are good comedians out there, but he's definitely the funniest.
He's up there. I grant you that. He is high end. I love Billy Connolly. That leaves us to our last question in the Koit Zone. How many countries on this earth have you visited, do you reckon?
Not many. Maybe 14, 16.
Just arbitrarily throwing out 14 and 16. I like it. That's good. Could be true. We just don't know.
Yeah.
We know of at least 3 or 4, don't we? Sao Paulo, Brazil.
I've been to America. Dealt with some cases two cases there. I've been to South America, as I mentioned. I've been to various countries in Europe, particularly Italy. I've been in Africa, India, Sri Lanka,
Scotland.
Scotland.
You have to include it.
Scotland.
England.
Yeah, but that was too dark. Yeah, I think that's all. I haven't been to the Far East, but I'm going to Japan next Easter.
That's cool. Have you been to Wales?
Yes.
That's good. That's good. So you've done most of the home countries. So that's you win on that front. Nick, thank you ever so much for appearing once again on KoitCast. I really appreciate your time. I want to say this on air. I think you're a fabulous communicator. You've got great stories. And I'm highly interested on everything you have to say. So thank you ever so much for coming on again.
Well, should you ever be stuck for a presenter, there's stuff that happened in Italy that we haven't touched on. So I'll leave that with you and maybe you can get back to me.
100%. I know I've got loads of questions again that I didn't get to, and I definitely want to explore Machu Picchu with you and ayahuasca. That's definitely stuff I need to touch on. But to everyone watching, check the links in the description to learn all about Nick. Thank you to everyone watching and listening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.